The incident occurred on a Tuesday, just after 11 p.m., in the sterile, echoing confines of the St. Jude's General Hospital physician's parking garage. The subject was Dr. Anaya Sharma, a 42-year-old black woman and the hospital's esteemed chief of otolaryngology. She had just finished a grueling 14-hour surgery and was trying to unlock her car, a sleek black Porsche Panamera. The officer was Keith Brogan, a 17-year veteran of the city police force with a history of excessive force complaints, all of which had been dismissed. He confronted Dr. Sharma on the pretext of a possible vehicle burglary. Despite her attempts to communicate non-verbally that she was the owner of the vehicle and was medically unable to speak, Officer Brogan interpreted her silence as hostile defiance. He escalated the encounter within 90 seconds, deploying his X-26 taser. The barb struck Dr. Sharma in the back, delivering a 5-second, 50,000-volt shock that sent her crashing onto the concrete. The primary accusation leveled against Officer Brogan in the subsequent investigation was not just the use of excessive force, but the catastrophic and professionally devastating injury he inflicted. The electrical trauma caused severe paralysis to the laryngeal nerves of one of the nation's leading vocal cord surgeons, rendering her permanently muted. This is the story of how a man with a badge and a bias destroyed a voice that had saved hundreds of others, only to find himself silenced by the very system he thought he controlled. The fluorescent lights of the P3 level hummed with a monotonous, sickly buzz, casting long, distorted shadows that danced between the concrete support pillars. Dr. Anaya Sharma felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over her, the kind that settled deep in your bones after a day spent reconstructing the delicate architecture of a human throat. Today, it had been a singer, a young woman with a promising career, whose vocal folds had been ravaged by polyps. Anaya had spent 10 hours under the magnified gaze of a surgical microscope, her hands, steady and sure, suturing tissues finer than a human hair. Now, all she wanted was the solace of her quiet home, a cup of tea, and the company of a good book. But her car, a symbol of her hard-won success that she rarely thought about, was refusing to cooperate. The key fob was dead, and the physical key, a relic she hadn't used in years, was stubbornly stuck in the driver's side door lock. She jiggled it gently, careful not to apply too much force. A frustrated sigh escaped her, but it was soundless. 3 days prior, she had undergone a minor, elective procedure herself, a Botox injection into a small muscle near her larynx to treat a minor spasm she'd developed. The irony was not lost on her. The nation's premier throat surgeon, temporarily silencing her own voice for a routine tune-up. The procedure had rendered her completely mute for what was supposed to be a week. She had a small, laminated card in her wallet explaining her condition, but she hadn't thought she'd need it between her office and her car. That was her first mistake. The sudden glare of red and blue lights flashing across the garage walls made her flinch. A police cruiser had pulled in behind her, its engine a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the concrete floor. Anaya straightened up, her heart giving a nervous little flutter. She was in her own designated parking spot, in the hospital where she ran an entire department, but the sight of those lights still triggered a primal, inherited fear. A stocky, middle-aged officer with a thick neck and a face set in a permanent scowl emerged from the driver's side. His movements were heavy, deliberate, each step of his polished boots echoing with an unearned authority. This was Officer Keith Brogan. He didn't ask, he accused. Evening. Step away from the vehicle. His voice was a gravelly bark that scraped against the quiet of the garage. Anaya complied immediately, raising her hands to show they were empty. She gave him a small, placating nod, her mind already racing to figure out the best way to explain the situation without a voice. Her phone. She could type a message. She started to lower one hand slowly toward the pocket of her scrubs, which were hidden under a simple gray zip-up hoodie. "I said step away," Brogan shouted, his hand instinctively moving to the butt of his holstered firearm. Hands on the roof of the car. Now, Anaya's eyes widened. This was escalating far too quickly. She placed her palms flat on the cold metal of her Porsche's roof, the position of submission feeling alien and deeply humiliating. She could feel his gaze boring into her back, cataloging her, black woman, expensive car, hoodie. In his mind, the equation had already been solved. Guilt. He circled her slowly, his boots crunching on a stray bit of gravel. "Gonna tell me what you're doing trying to break into this car?" he demanded, his tone dripping with condescension. Anaya shook her head, a small, frustrated gesture. She tried to turn her head to look at him, to use her eyes to convey her plea for understanding, but he barked again. "Face forward. Don't you look at me." She squeezed her eyes shut for a second. This was a nightmare. The humiliation was turning into a cold, creeping dread. She had to communicate. She remembered the hospital ID lanyard around her neck, tucked under her hoodie. It had her name, her photo, her title, Chief of Otolaryngology. That would end this. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her right hand an inch off the roof, intending to pull the ID out. Before her fingers could even touch the fabric of her hoodie, Brogan lunged forward, slamming her hand back down onto the car with a painful crack. "What did I just say? You deaf?" he snarled, his face now close to her ear. "You think I'm playing games? I will light you up if you reach for something again. You understand me." Anaya winced, a sharp pain shooting up her wrist. Tears of frustration and pain pricked at the corners of her eyes. She nodded her head vigorously. Yes, she understood. She understood that he saw a threat, not a person. She understood that her silence, a medical necessity, was being twisted into a weapon against her. He was constructing a narrative of noncompliance, and she was powerless to speak the truth. He backed away again, creating distance, his posture shifting into a tactical stance. He was treating this like a high-risk felony stop, not a woman with a stuck car key. "Dispatch, I've got a 10 to 54, possible auto theft in progress at St. Jude's General, P3. Female, black, noncompliant. Send me a backup unit." The words echoed in the garage, each one a nail in the coffin of this rapidly deteriorating encounter. Noncompliant. The word was a lie, a justification he was building for whatever he planned to do next. Anaya's mind, usually so clear and analytical, was a maelstrom of fear and fury. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand here and let this happen. She saw the thin layer of dust on her car's rear windshield. An idea sparked. Writing. She could write. Keeping one hand firmly planted on the roof as he had commanded, she began to move the fingers of her other hand, tracing letters into the grime. S. L. O. W. L. Y. She formed the word owner. She got as far as the W, when Brogan's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "That's it. You're done." He had misinterpreted her slow, deliberate movement as something else entirely. A signal? A spell? In his prejudiced mind, it was defiance. "Stop resisting," he screamed, his voice pitching higher with a strange mix of fear and excitement. "Resisting what?" She wanted to scream back. "I'm doing everything you say." But the words were trapped, prisoners in a throat that would not obey. She saw him draw the taser. The yellow and black plastic of the weapon looked like a monstrous insect in his meaty hand. A small red laser dot appeared on her back, dancing over her hoodie. Anaya's entire world narrowed to that single, menacing red dot. This can't be happening, she thought. Not here. Not like this. A young resident, Dr. Chun, was walking toward the elevators when he saw the flashing lights. He slowed, his curiosity piqued. He recognized the Porsche. It belonged to Dr. Sharma, his department chief. He saw her at the back of the car, hands up, and a cop yelling. It didn't make sense. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. From the other direction, a veteran nurse named Brenda was finishing her double shift. She knew Dr. Sharma well, respected her immensely. When she saw the officer draw his taser, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Wait! Stop!" she yelled, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the concrete space. But Officer Brogan heard nothing but the roaring in his own ears, the siren song of his own authority. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" he bellowed, the procedural chant a thin veneer of justification for the violence to come. Anaya braced herself for the impact, her surgeon's mind clinically cataloging the potential damage. Nerve damage, muscle contractions, cardiac arrhythmia. But the clinical detachment vanished in the instant the trigger was pulled. A sound like 1,000 angry hornets filled the air as two metal prongs, trailing thin copper wires, shot across the space and embedded themselves in the fabric of her hoodie and the soft tissue of her upper back. The world dissolved into pure, white-hot agony. 50,000 volts of electricity seized every muscle in her body, locking them in an excruciating, violent spasm. Her back arched impossibly, a silent scream trapped behind her paralyzed vocal cords. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled to the ground, her head narrowly missing the car's bumper. Her body convulsed on the gritty concrete, a marionette whose strings were being pulled by a cruel and invisible puppeteer. The 5-second cycle felt like an eternity. When it finally stopped, she lay twitching, the acrid smell of ozone filling her nostrils. A thin line of drool trickled from the corner of her mouth. Through a haze of pain, she could see Officer Brogan standing over her, the taser still pointed at her prone form. His breathing was heavy, ragged. "Should have complied," he grunted, the words a hollow echo in the now silent garage. He saw her as a suspect neutralized, a threat contained. He had no idea he had just committed an act of ruinous, career-ending malpractice on a woman whose life was dedicated to the very instrument of communication he had punished her for not using. The first to arrive was hospital security, 2 guards in ill-fitting uniforms, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. They saw a police officer, a taser, and a woman in scrubs on the ground. One of them immediately recognized her. "That's Dr. Sharma," he whispered to his partner, his eyes wide. The head of Yinti, Brogan, overheard him and scoffed, the sound loud and dismissive. "Yeah, right. Doctor, my foot." She was trying to pop the lock on this thing, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The nurse, Brenda, rushed forward, her initial shock replaced by a wave of protective fury. "What did you do?" she yelled, her voice echoing in the garage. "She's a doctor here. That's her car. Are you insane?" Dr. Chun, the resident, was now recording openly, the light on his phone a small, defiant star in the gloom. He made sure to capture the officer's badge number, the taser on the ground, and the convulsing form of his boss. The arrival of a second police car heralded the appearance of Sergeant Frank Miller, Brogan's shift supervisor. Miller was a tall, lean man with weary eyes that had seen too many messes made by cops like Brogan. He took in the scene with a quick, practiced glance. The distraught witnesses, the recording phone, the downed woman, and his own officer, puffed up with a dangerous combination of adrenaline and self-righteousness. "Brogan, what the hell happened?" Miller's voice was calm, but it carried an edge of steel. "Sarge, I got a call for a B&E in progress," Brogan began, his well-rehearsed litany of justifications spilling out. Suspect was attempting to gain entry to the vehicle. I gave her lawful commands to show me her hands and step away. She refused to comply, refused to identify herself, made furtive movements. I felt she was a threat, so I deployed the taser. Miller looked from Brogan to the witnesses, then down at Anaya, who was now being attended to by Brenda. Anaya was conscious, her eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Her body still trembled with residual tremors. "She refused to speak to you?" Miller asked, his gaze settling on Brogan. "Not a word, Sarge. Just stared at me. Silent defiance." It was unnerving, silent defiance. The phrase hung in the air, thick with Brogan's own biased interpretation. Miller knelt beside Anaya, his expression softening. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you tell me your name?" Anaya stared at him, her lips trembling as she tried to form a word, any word. But nothing came out. Only a faint, wheezing gasp. A tear of pure, unadulterated frustration slid down her cheek. She gestured weakly toward her car, then toward the key still stuck in the lock. Miller's eyes followed her gesture. He saw the key. He looked at her scrubs, the hospital logo clearly visible now. He looked at the designated parking sign, reserved, Chief of Otolaryngology. A cold, sickening feeling began to crawl up his spine. "Brogan," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you try to ascertain who she was before you shot her?" "I gave her every opportunity, Sarge. She wouldn't cooperate." "Her purse is in the car," Brenda the nurse interjected, her voice sharp with anger. "Her ID is in there. Maybe you should have tried looking for that before you electrocuted her." Miller stood up and turned to the security guard. "The vehicle is unlocked. Please retrieve her handbag from the passenger seat." Gently, the guard complied, carefully opening the door and pulling out a leather tote bag. He handed it to Sergeant Miller, who placed it on the hood of the cruiser. He opened it and pulled out a wallet. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. "Sharma, Anaya," he read aloud, his voice flat. He then pulled out a second card, the hospital identification. He stared at it for a long moment, his face hardening. He turned the ID around so Brogan could see the photo of the smiling, professional woman and the bold text beneath it. Dr. Anaya Sharma, chief of otolaryngology. Brogan's face, which had been flushed with righteous adrenaline, seemed to collapse. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. His jaw went slack. "Doctor," he stammered, the words sounding foreign and absurd on his lips. "No. No way. She was what, Brogan?" Miller's voice was like ice. "A black woman in a hoodie next to a nice car? Is that what she was?" Miller continued to rummage through the wallet, his movements now brisk and angry. And then he found it. A small, laminated card tucked behind her insurance information. It was a medical alert card, the kind patients are given after sensitive procedures. He read the simple, devastating words aloud, each one a hammer blow to Brogan's career. "I am temporarily mute following a minor laryngeal procedure. I can communicate via text or writing. Please be patient." The silence that followed was profound. It was heavier and more damning than Anaya's had ever been. Brogan stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. Please be patient. He had given her 90 seconds. He had mistaken a plea for patience as an act of war. The full, catastrophic weight of his actions crashed down on him. He had not just assaulted a citizen. He had assaulted a disabled person. He had not just injured a doctor. He had potentially destroyed the career of a surgeon in the very hospital they were standing in. The irony was so thick, so bitter, it was almost suffocating. Paramedics had arrived, a flurry of professional calm in the midst of the chaos. They were carefully fitting a neck brace on Anaya, checking her vitals. She was still unable to speak, her breathing shallow and ragged. A new kind of pain was blooming in her throat, a sharp, searing sensation, as if the muscles had been torn apart from the inside. The violent, uncontrolled contractions from the tossing had done more damage than the minor procedure ever could have. She knew, with the cold certainty of an expert, that something was terribly wrong. She motioned for one of the paramedics' tablets. With trembling fingers, she typed a short, clinical message and showed it to Sergeant Miller. His face grew even grimmer as he read it. "Severe laryngospasm and muscle trauma due to electroshock," he read out for Brogan's benefit, his voice dripping with contempt. "Possible permanent damage to the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Vocal cord paralysis likely. I need a full neuromuscular workup." Now, Brogan began to backpedal, his voice a desperate, stammering whine. "Sarge, I didn't know. She didn't say anything. She was non-compliant. Her movements, they were threatening. I acted according to my training." "Your training?" Miller spun on him, his face a mask of fury. "Your training tells you to tase a silent, unarmed woman who is trying to write a word in the dust on her own car? Is that what they teach you at the academy now, Keith?" "Because that's not what they taught me." He pointed a trembling finger at the recording phone of Dr. Chun, who had not moved an inch. "That young man over there has the whole thing on video. The whole world is going to see what your training looks like. They're going to see you attack a disabled woman for the crime of being silent." Miller took a deep breath, composing himself. The time for yelling was over. The time for procedure had begun. "Officer Brogan," he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. "You're relieved of duty. Give me your firearm and your badge." Brogan looked as if he'd been punched. "Sarge, come on. It was a misunderstanding. The time for misunderstandings is over," Miller said, holding out his hand. "Your badge." Now defeated, Brogan unclipped his badge from his uniform, the metal suddenly feeling like a lead weight in his hand. He unholstered his service weapon and handed it over, but first. His movements were robotic, his eyes vacant. In the span of 10 minutes, he had gone from an enforcer of the law to its subject. "You're on administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation," Miller continued, his voice relentless. "Do not contact anyone involved in this incident. Do not leave your home until you are contacted by the department. Go home and pray. Pray that this brilliant woman you just assaulted doesn't have her life's work completely destroyed." As the paramedics loaded Dr. Anaya Sharma onto a gurney, she locked eyes with the man who had just shattered her world. There was no hatred in her gaze, only a profound and devastating pity. He had been so sure of his power, so wrapped in the armor of his authority, that he had become blind. He had seen a stereotype, not a human being. And in his blindness, he had destroyed them both. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By the next morning, Dr. Chin's video was everywhere. It was on every local news channel, every national news blog, and had amassed millions of views on social media. The hashtag Silent Defiance trended for 3 days straight. The body cam footage, released under immense public pressure, was even more damning. It captured Brogan's escalating aggression, his contemptuous language, and his utter refusal to de-escalate. It showed Anaya's slow, desperate attempt to write on her car window, a gesture that no reasonable person could have interpreted as a threat. The police chief held a press conference, his face grim, promising a swift and transparent investigation. It was the standard, hollow promise, but this time, the pressure was too immense to ignore. The hospital's board of directors released a scathing statement, condemning the barbaric and unwarranted attack on one of their most respected physicians. They announced their full support for Dr. Sharma and pledged to cooperate with the lawsuit that was inevitably coming. Anaya's diagnosis was as bad as she had feared. The massive electrical discharge had effectively fried the delicate nerves controlling her left vocal cord, leaving it completely paralyzed. Her right vocal cord was severely weakened. Her voice, once clear and confident, was gone, replaced by a strained, airy whisper that was barely audible. Her career as a surgeon was over. The intricate surgeries she performed required not just steady hands, but the ability to communicate clearly and commandingly with her team in high-pressure situations. A whisper wouldn't suffice. The life she had built, a life of healing and service, had been stolen from her in a parking garage. Her attorneys, a high-powered civil rights firm that took her case pro bono, filed a lawsuit against Officer Brogan and the city, citing excessive force, negligence, and a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The city, facing an unwinnable case with irrefutable video evidence and a highly sympathetic victim, quickly moved to settle. Keith Brogan was fired from the police force 2 weeks after the incident. The Internal Affairs investigation found he had violated a dozen departmental policies. 6 months later, a grand jury indicted him on felony charges of aggravated assault and assault under color of law. His silent defiance defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. His career, his pension, and his freedom were all gone. He had become a pariah, a poster child for racist policing. The settlement Anaya received was one of the largest in the city's history. But the money meant little to her. It couldn't restore her voice. It couldn't give her back the operating room. So she decided to use it to create a different kind of voice. She established the Sharma Foundation for Communicative Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to 2 causes, providing legal and financial support to victims of police brutality, especially those with disabilities, and funding research into advanced communication technologies for nonverbal individuals. She poured her grief and rage into building something new. A year after the attack, she sat in a sterile therapy room, not unlike the ones her own patients used to sit in. Across from her was a speech pathologist, a kind woman who had been her colleague and friend for years. They were working with a new assistive device, a tablet that translated her typed words into a synthesized voice. The process was slow, frustrating. Anaya typed a message onto the screen, her fingers moving with the same precision she had once used to hold a scalpel. The synthesized voice, a generic female alto, spoke the words into the room. "He tried to silence me because he was afraid," the tablet said. "He thought my silence was a weakness he could punish. He didn't understand that silence can also be a source of strength." Her friend smiled, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and admiration. "Your new voice is going to be louder than your old one ever was, Anaya. You're going to make sure of that." Anaya looked down at her hands, the hands that had performed so many miracles. They could no longer perform surgery, but they could still write. They could still build. They could still fight. She typed one final message, her own quiet promise to the world. The synthesized voice filled the small room, clear and unwavering, a testament to a will that could not be broken. "He took my voice. So I will spend the rest of my life making sure the whole world hears my story, and the stories of everyone else he and those like him have tried to silence."